The first thing I noticed about the 1886 Crescent Hotel was the smell of lilacs in a hallway where no lilacs grew. I had just stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, suitcase rolling behind me on a carpet so old it had gone the color of weak tea, and the scent moved past me from left to right, the way a person walks past you in a narrow space. I turned to look. The hallway was empty. The wall sconces were lit, but seemed to be lit from a long way inside themselves, as if the light were arriving from somewhere deeper than the bulbs. At the far end, a housekeeping cart sat unattended, its towels stacked in a way that looked too neat, almost arranged. And underneath the lilac smell, faint enough that I had to stop walking to catch it, there was the sour mineral smell of old water. I had come to Eureka Springs on what I told myself was a working vacation. I am a freelance writer, and a small press in Little Rock had asked me to put together a long essay on the spa hotels of the Ozarks, the ones built when people still believed mountain water could cure them. The Crescent was the obvious centerpiece. It had been everything in its time. A luxury resort for the railroad rich in 1886, a women's college, a junior college, and then, in the late 1930s, the thing it is most quietly remembered for a hospital run by a man named Norman Baker, who claimed he could cure cancer with a recipe of corn silk, watermelon seed, and clover, and who charged the dying for the privilege of believing him. That history is not hidden at the Crescent. It is printed in the brochures. It is part of the ghost tour. The hotel has made its peace with what happened inside its walls, the way old buildings sometimes do, by turning the horror into a story you can buy a ticket to. I had expected that. What I had not expected was the feeling I got crossing the lobby for the first time, a small, specific feeling, like walking into a room where two people have just stopped arguing. The clerk at the front desk was a young man named Wyatt, polite in the careful way of people who work the night audit. He apologized that my original room on the 2nd floor had been switched. A maintenance issue, he said, nothing dramatic. They had moved me up to 419, which he described as a quieter room mostly. He paused on the word mostly the way a person pauses when they almost said something else. Then he slid the key card across the counter, asked if I needed help with my bag, and told me the elevator on the right was the one to take. The left one, he added, sometimes opened on the wrong floor. I thanked him and didn't ask what the wrong floor meant. The elevator on the right groaned upward through the old shaft like something turning over in its sleep. The numbers above the door lit one at a time, slowly, almost reluctantly. Between 3 and 4, the cab paused for a full second longer than it should have. I felt the floor settle. The light flickered, recovered, and the doors opened on 4. That was when the lilac smell met me. Room 419 sat at the end of the south wing, just past a small alcove with a window looking down over the lawn. The window was open about an inch. I remember that because the first thing I did before unpacking was close it. Mountain air in November is cold, and the radiator under the sill was ticking softly, trying to keep up. When I pulled the sash down, the glass shivered in its frame, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape pass on the lawn below, a long, slow shape that did not have the gait of any animal I knew. I leaned closer. There was nothing there, only the lamps along the path, and the soft brown of the grass, and the line of pine trees beyond. The room itself was beautiful in the way these rooms are. Wallpaper with small repeating roses. A 4-poster bed with too many pillows. A clawfoot tub visible through the half-open bathroom door. There was a small writing desk by the window, and on the desk, set squarely in the middle, was a single brass key. Not a key card. An old key, the kind with a long stem and a flat, toothed bit at the end. There was no note with it, no tag, no envelope. It was simply there, as if someone had set it down a moment before I walked in and stepped out the other door. I picked it up. It was cold, the way metal is cold when it has been sitting on stone, not wood. I turned it over. There was a number stamped into the bow, 218, and beneath the number, almost worn away, 3 letters I had to angle toward the lamp to read. BHW. I did not yet know what those letters meant. I would learn, slowly over the next several days, what they had meant to the people who once worked in this building, and why a key with that stamp was not supposed to exist anymore. I set the key back on the desk. I told myself a housekeeper had forgotten it. I told myself I would hand it in at the front desk in the morning. Then I unpacked and ran the tap in the bathroom until the water lost its sulfur taste and got into bed with the small reading lamp on, because the overhead light buzzed in a way I did not like. Sometime around 2 a.m, I woke up because I could hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow and even, walking from the elevator end toward my end. They came right up to my threshold. They stopped, and then very politely, very softly, 3 knuckles tapped against the wood of my door. I lay still. I did not move. I waited for whoever it was to speak or to knock again or to leave. Instead, on the desk across the room, the brass key turned over by itself with a small, clear sound, like a tooth tapping a plate. I did not sleep again that night. I lay in the bed with the lamp on and watched the brass key on the desk, the way you watch a spider on a wall, not moving, not blinking, waiting for it to prove that what you saw was real. It did not move again. After about an hour, the radiator clicked off and the room cooled by a few degrees, and I started to wonder whether the key had moved at all or whether the click I'd heard had been the heating system and my eyes had simply caught the brass at the wrong moment. That is the thing about places like the Crescent. They train you very quickly to argue with yourself. At 7, I dressed and went down to breakfast. The dining room sat off the main lobby with tall windows facing east toward the ridge, and the morning light came through them in long, pale bars. There were maybe a dozen other guests, mostly couples, mostly quiet. A woman at the next table was reading the small printed history the hotel left on every table. The one with the sepia photographs and the dates and the carefully chosen verbs. She caught me looking and smiled, and I smiled back, and we did not speak. I took the brass key down with me, wrapped in a hotel napkin in my coat pocket. After breakfast, I walked it to the front desk. Wyatt was gone. In his place stood an older woman with silver hair pulled back severely, a name tag that read, Marlene, and the calm, unsurprised expression of a person who had worked in this lobby for a long time. I set the key on the counter and explained where I had found it. I said I assumed a housekeeper had left it. Marlene looked at the key without picking it up. Her eyes went to the number, then to the 3 letters beneath, and stayed there for a moment longer than a glance should stay. Where did you say this was, ma'am? Room 419, on the desk. On the desk? she repeated slowly, as if she were writing it down inside herself. Then she did pick it up and turned it over in her fingers and set it back down with a small, precise sound. She told me she would have housekeeping check the room. She told me she would speak to the night staff. She thanked me. The whole exchange took less than a minute and felt somehow like it had taken much longer. I asked, because I am a writer and because I had nothing to lose, what the letters BHW stood for. Marlene's hand stopped on the key. She did not look up. She said, "That's an old stamping. We don't use those anymore." "For which rooms?" "For a wing that isn't there anymore," she said. And she smiled professionally and slid the key into a drawer below the counter and asked if there was anything else she could help me with. I spent the rest of the morning walking the public parts of the hotel with my notebook out, the way I would have walked any other historic property. I sketched the floor plan of the lobby. I noted the marble fireplace, the long mahogany registration desk, the framed photographs in the corridor that led to the gift shop, a row of black and white images showing the building in its various lives, the 1886 grand opening, the Crescent College for young women, girls in white dresses on the front lawn, the Baker Hospital years, with its painted-over signs and its sinister hand-lettered claims. There was a gap in the photographs between 1908 and 1918. 10 years with nothing on the wall to mark them. I noted that too. By the early afternoon, I had drifted up to the 4th floor again, this time on foot, using the wide staircase at the south end of the lobby. The stairs creaked in the way old stairs creak, but on the landing between 3 and 4, I felt the temperature drop several degrees in the span of a single step. Not a draft, a drop. I stopped, turned around, went back down 2 steps. The warmth returned. I went up again. The cold met me on the same tread, like a line drawn across the staircase. I made a small mark in my notebook. Cold band, 3.5 Landon, South Stair. I was halfway down the 4th floor hallway toward 419 when I heard the laughter. It was a child's laughter, brief, 2 short syllables, coming from somewhere ahead of me and to the right. The hallway in front of me was empty. The doors were all closed. The housekeeping cart from the night before was gone. I stood still and listened. The laughter did not repeat. What I heard instead a moment later was the soft sound of a ball bouncing once, twice, a 3rd time, and then nothing. I told myself it was through a wall. The Crescent has thick walls, but not soundproof ones, and a family with a child could easily be in any of those rooms. I kept walking. When I reached 419, my key card did not work. The little light on the lock blinked red. I tried again. Red. I tried a 3rd time, slowing down, holding the card flat against the reader the way the laminated instruction sheet showed. Red. I stepped back and checked the number on the door, because at old hotels you learn quickly that the numbering does not always follow logic. It said 419. I checked the small paper sleeve my card had come in. It said 419. I tried once more. The light went green and the lock clicked, and I pushed the door open into a room that was not mine. The wallpaper was different, striped, not floral. The bed was a single, not a 4-poster. The window was on the wrong wall. There was no writing desk. There was, instead, a wooden chair facing the corner, and on the chair, folded, was a gray cardigan I recognized at once, though I had only seen it the night before. Wyatt had been wearing it behind the front desk. I stepped back into the hallway. The door swung shut behind me on its slow hinge. I looked at the number again. 419. I looked at my card. 419. My hand was shaking a little, which I noted with the small, detached part of my brain that was still trying to take notes for the article. I went down to the front desk. Marlene was no longer there. The new clerk, a young man named Devin, frowned at my card, swiped it through his own reader, and told me the card was assigned to room 419, 4th floor, south wing, and showed no irregularities. He offered to walk me up. I said yes. When we reached the door, he tapped it once with his knuckle, then used his MasterCard. The light went green. He pushed the door open and stepped aside and gestured me in. The room was mine again. Floral wallpaper, 4-poster bed, clawfoot tub through the half-open bathroom door, writing desk by the window, and on the desk, exactly where I had found it the night before, sat the brass key. Devin saw the key. I am certain of that. He looked at it for a long second, then looked at me, then looked back at it, and the smooth professional surface of his face did not change, but something behind it went very still. He asked me, in the polite voice they use at the Crescent, whether I had perhaps brought the key up from the desk myself. I told him no. He nodded once. He said he would let Marlene know. He stepped out and pulled the door gently shut behind him. I stood in the middle of the room and did not touch anything. It is important, I think, to describe exactly what I did next, because I want you to understand that I am not a person who goes looking for these things. I sat down on the edge of the bed and I made a list in my notebook. On the left side, I wrote everything that had a reasonable explanation: the lilac smell, old sachets in a linen closet, ventilation moving the air, the footsteps in the hallway, another guest, drunk, confused, gone to the wrong door, the cold band on the stairs, a draft from a service hatch, a cracked window on the landing above, the wrong room behind my own door, a momentary disorientation, a similar layout glimpsed through a half-open door across the hall, a trick of memory. On the right side, I wrote everything that did not have an explanation. The key turning over by itself. The cardigan on the chair in a room that should not have existed. The fact that the brass key, after being placed in a drawer at the front desk, was now back on my writing table. The right side of the list was shorter than the left, but it would not be argued with. I called the front desk from the room phone. Marlene answered. I asked her as calmly as I could whether anyone had been into my room since I had checked out the key with her that morning. She said no. Housekeeping had been told to wait. She said she would come up herself. While I waited, I walked around the room slowly, the way you walk around a crime scene in a film, looking for what was different. The bed was made. My suitcase sat on the luggage rack where I had left it. My notebook had been on the bedside table. It was on the bedside table. My coat hung on the hook by the door. Everything in its place, everything correct, except the key and one other thing I almost missed. The small framed map of the hotel that hung beside the door, the kind of decorative floor plan that every old hotel seems to have somewhere, half art, half wayfinding, had been straightened. The night before, I remembered it leaning slightly to the right because I had noticed it and decided not to fix it. Now it hung perfectly level. I stepped closer to look at it. It was a hand-drawn rendering of the Crescent, dated 1901, with the wings labeled in narrow script. The east wing, the west wing, the central pavilion, the stair towers. And along the north side of the building, where today there is only lawn and a service drive, the map showed a smaller fourth wing, attached to the main building by a short corridor. The label was in tighter writing than the others. Bathhouse Wing, BHW. I stared at those 3 letters for a long time. Then I took out my phone and photographed the map. Marlene arrived within 5 minutes. She did not knock. She tapped once, with a knuckle that sounded oddly familiar. I let her in. She looked at the desk. The brass key was still there. She did not seem surprised this time, only tired. I asked her about the bathhouse wing. She closed the door behind her and stood with her hands folded in front of her. And for the first time, her professional posture loosened a little. She told me that the bathhouse had been part of the original 1886 building, a long, low structure built to take advantage of the springs the town had been founded on. People came up from the railway to soak in the mineral water and to be told it would cure them of whatever they had. The wing had been damaged by fire, she said, sometime around 1908, and not rebuilt in the same form. Parts of it had been absorbed into the main hotel. Other parts had been demolished. By the time Norman Baker bought the building in the 30s, the bathhouse as a structure was mostly gone. Mostly, I said. Marlene looked at the brass key on the desk. There are still pieces of it, she said, in the basement. We don't use them. I asked her why a key stamped for the bathhouse wing would be sitting on my desk. She did not answer that question directly. What she said was, sometimes things come up out of the lower levels. We don't know how. The housekeepers find them keys, sometimes a hairpin, once a small ceramic cup. We put them in a box in the office. They tend to wander. They turn up in rooms, she said. Always on the upper floors, always on a desk or a nightstand. We've stopped trying to track it. I asked her how often this happened. She thought for a moment. 3 or 4 times a year, sometimes more. We had a stretch in 2019 where it was almost weekly. I asked her if any pattern had ever been noticed. That was the question that changed her face. She looked at me carefully, the way a person looks at someone they are deciding whether to trust. And then she said, "The guests, it happens to tend to be writers." I felt the room go quiet, in the way rooms do when an idea lands inside them. Writers? I said. Researchers, reporters, people who came here to ask questions about the building. She gave a small, tight smile that had no humor in it. We notice. She left a few minutes later. She took the brass key with her this time, wrapped in a clean handkerchief from her cardigan pocket. She told me she would put it in the office safe and not the drawer, and asked me politely to let her know if it returned. That night I lay in bed and listened to the hotel. I could hear the elevator on the right, 3 rooms away, moving up and down on its slow schedule. I could hear the HVAC sighing in the ceiling. I could hear, every few minutes, the small ticks of the radiator. And around midnight I heard, faintly from somewhere below me, below the floor below, that the unmistakable sound of water running into a large basin, and a single distant voice saying a word I could not quite make out. The next morning I asked Marlene if I could see the basement. I framed it as research for the article Historical Hotels, Original Infrastructure, the Bones Beneath the Renovation. She did not look surprised. She told me that the public ghost tour included a portion of the lower level, the morgue room with its old autopsy table, and that I was welcome to join that evening's tour. I told her I meant the parts that were not on the tour. The bathhouse pieces. The sections behind the doors guests did not see. She was quiet for long enough that I thought she was going to refuse. Then she told me she would speak to the maintenance supervisor, a man named Hollis, and that if he agreed, he would take me down himself in the afternoon. She made it clear, in the careful way she made everything clear, that I would not be going down alone. Hollis was a wide, soft-spoken man in his 60s, with hands that looked like they had been working on the same building for 30 years, because they had. He met me by the service door near the kitchen at 3 o'clock. He carried a heavy flashlight in a holster on his belt and a ring of keys that hung from a chain attached to his work pants. He did not seem nervous. He did not seem casual either. He had the manner of someone who was about to take a guest into a part of a house he himself preferred not to spend time in. We went down through a stairwell I had not noticed before, behind a door marked "Employees Only" in faded paint. The stairs were concrete, painted gray, and they smelled at first like any basement stairs dust, old paint, a faint dryness. 2 flights down, the smell changed. The mineral smell I had caught in the hallway my first night came up the stairs to meet us, stronger here, like wet limestone left in a closed jar. Hollis stopped on the landing and let me catch up. He pointed his flashlight along a corridor that ran north, away from the main footprint of the hotel above us. The walls down here were not the smooth painted plaster of the upper floors. They were unfinished stone, the original 1886 limestone, with mortar joints that had been patched over so many times the patches themselves looked geological. "This is as far as the tour goes," he said, gesturing back over his shoulder at a closed door behind us. "What you wanted to see is up that way." We walked. The corridor narrowed. The ceiling dropped. The lights here were not original. They were the modern fluorescent tubes hung at intervals on conduit pipe, but every third tube was out, and the spaces between the lit ones were long enough that we walked through pockets of real darkness, and then back into the cold white glare, and then into darkness again. Hollis's flashlight added a moving circle along the floor. After about 30 yards, the corridor turned right and ended at a brick wall. I stopped. Hollis kept walking right up to the wall and put his hand flat on it. "This is where it ends now," he said, officially. He turned his flashlight to the left. There was a narrow opening in the side of the corridor I had not seen. An arched doorway, maybe 4 feet wide, with no door in it. It led into a room I could not see the back of. He went in first. I followed. The room was long, low-ceilinged, and floored with hexagonal tile that had been white once and was now the color of old teeth. Along the left-hand wall ran a row of shallow basins, 6 of them, built into the stone, each with a brass tap above it. The taps were green with age. The basins were dry. Above them, set into the wall at eye level, were small rectangular openings that I realized after a moment had once held mirrors. This was a piece of the bathhouse. Hollis swept the flashlight slowly around the room. In the far corner, a wooden crate sat on the floor, and beside it a small folding table on which someone at some point, recently or not, I could not tell, had laid out a row of objects on a white cloth. 3 keys with long stems, a hairpin, a ceramic cup, a small leather-bound notebook closed. "The wandering things," I said. Hollis nodded. "We bring them down here when they turn up. Marlene's idea. She figured if they came from down here, maybe they'd settle if we put them back. Does it work?" Sometimes. He did not elaborate. I moved closer to the table. The notebook was the kind of small pocket diary that traveling men used to carry in the early years of the last century, with a thin black cover and a place on the spine for a pencil that was no longer there. I asked Hollis if I could open it. He hesitated. Then he said, "Marlene already photographed every page. Go ahead." I opened the notebook. The handwriting was small, tight, sloping forward. The first page bore a name, Dr. E.M. Reeves, and an address in St. Louis, and a date, May 1907. The rest of the book was a series of brief entries, most of them medical notations. Patient receiving baths twice daily, patient improving, patient declining, Mrs. H refusing further treatment, husband insistent. A run of entries from early 1908 grew shorter and shorter, until the last few were only initials and times. The final entry, dated April 14th, 1908, said simply, "Fire on north side. 2 patients unaccounted for. Will return tomorrow." There were no entries after that. I asked Hollis what had happened to the 2 patients. He did not look at me. He looked at the row of dry basins along the wall and at the empty mirror frames above them, and he said, "The official record says everybody got out. And the unofficial record?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There's a part of the wing under us we never dug out. After the fire, they walled it off, cheaper than clearing it. There's a door down here that goes that way. We don't open it." I asked him where the door was. He looked at me then, finally, and his eyes had the patient resignation of a man who had been asked this question before and had learned that the people who asked it always ended up wanting to see. "Back hall," he said. "Past the morgue room, behind the laundry." He did not offer to take me, not that day. We went back up. As we climbed the stairs, somewhere behind us, down in the dry room with the basins and the dead taps, I heard one of the brass faucets cough just once. The small, dry rattle of a pipe with no water in it. Hollis did not stop walking. He did not turn around. But on the landing he paused, one hand on the rail, and he said without looking at me, "If you go looking for that door, don't go alone." I did not look for the door that day. I am not a brave person, and I am suspicious of writers who pretend otherwise. What I did instead was something I knew how to do. I went looking for a witness. The Crescent has a long staff history, and a surprising number of its older employees still live in Eureka Springs. Marlene gave me, with some reluctance, the name of a woman named Edith Pell, who had worked as a head housekeeper at the hotel from 1971 until her retirement in 2006. Edith lived in a small wood frame house about a mile down the hill from the hotel, on a street where the trees grew right up to the porches. I called her from my room. She answered on the 3rd ring. When I told her who I was and why I was calling, she said, "Took them long enough to send somebody," and gave me her address. I walked down in the late afternoon. The light in Eureka Springs in November has a particular quality, thin, slanting, the color of weak honey, and the town looked, as I walked through it, like a place that had agreed a long time ago to keep its strangeness politely in the background. Edith met me at her door in a cardigan, very much like Marlene's, and I wondered briefly whether the hotel issued them. She made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table. She did not ask me what I had seen. She asked me which floor I was on. "4th," I said. "South wing or north?" "South." She nodded. "That's all right. The south side is mostly quiet. It's the north end of 4 you have to watch." I asked her why. She stirred her coffee. She told me she had started at the Crescent when she was 22 years old, fresh from a small town in Madison County, and had been put on the housekeeping rotation under a woman named Mrs. Lacey, who had been head housekeeper since the 1950s. Mrs. Lacey, she said, had taught her 2 things about the hotel. The first was how to make a bed so tight you could bounce a quarter off it. The second was a list of rooms and stairwells and times of day when you did not go alone, and why. She had it written down, Edith said, on a piece of cardstock in her desk drawer. The girls called it the do not list. When she retired, she gave it to me. When I retired, I gave it to the woman after me. I don't know if they still keep it. I asked her what was on the list. She thought for a moment the way people do when they are trying to remember not the words but the order. Then she said, "Don't take the left elevator after midnight. It opens on a floor that isn't there, not always, but often enough. Don't walk past room 218 alone if you can avoid it, even though there is no 218 anymore. They changed the numbering in 1947. Walk past where it used to be in pairs. Don't go into the laundry, from the back hall after the dryers stop running for the night. Use the kitchen door. Don't answer the lobby phone between 2 and 3 in the morning if it rings and the line on the switchboard is dead. And don't, under any circumstances, open the door behind the laundry." I set my coffee down. "Why not?" I asked. Edith looked at me across the table for a long, level moment. She was not a dramatic woman. She had the steady eyes of someone who had spent 35 years cleaning the rooms of strangers and not being surprised by what she found. "Because," she said, "Mrs. Lacey opened it once, in 1962. She told me about it on the day she retired. I was the only one she ever told." I waited. Edith said, "She'd been down in the basement to check on a leak. The boy who was supposed to do it hadn't shown up. She had a flashlight and a set of master keys. The door behind the laundry had a padlock on it then, but the padlock had been cut, and the door was open about an inch. She thought maybe the boy had gone in and gotten hurt. She pushed it open. What did she see? A hallway," Edith said. "Going north, tile floor, wet. She said the tile was wet even though there was no water anywhere else in the basement, and she had just checked. She called the boy's name down the hallway. Nobody answered. But she said while she was standing there, with the flashlight pointed down the hall, she heard somebody way down at the far end say her name back. Her first name? Her maiden name, Edith said, which she had not used in 20 years. We sat in the kitchen for a while without speaking. The refrigerator clicked on. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and stopped. I asked Edith whether she herself had ever seen anything in the hotel she could not explain. She gave a small smile. "Honey, I worked there 35 years. I saw things every week. Most of them weren't worth telling. A door that opened, a bell that rang, a guest who described a person at breakfast that nobody else had seen." He stopped counting. She paused. "But I'll tell you the one that stayed with me." She told me she'd been making up a room on the 4th floor in the winter of 1989, in a room that I realized, as she described it, was 419. My room. She had stripped the bed and was carrying the sheets to the cart in the hallway. When she came back into the room, there was a man sitting in the chair by the window. He was not, she said, a frightening man. He wore a dark suit and a starched collar of a style that had not been current since before the First World War. He had a small notebook on his knee and a pencil in his hand. He was writing. He did not look up at her. He did not seem to know she was there. After a moment, he closed the notebook, slipped it into his inside pocket, and stood. He walked past her, out the open door into the hallway, and turned right toward the elevator. She followed him. By the time she reached the hallway, it was empty. "I went down to the desk," she said. "I asked Mrs. Lacey if a man matching that description was registered. She didn't even check the book. She just said Reeves again and went back to her paperwork. I felt the muscles along my spine cool." "Reeves," I said. Edith nodded. "Dr. Reeves. Mrs. Lacey said he turned up every few years, always in the same room, always writing in that notebook, always walked out toward the elevator and was gone before you could follow." I asked Edith if Mrs. Lacey had ever said what she thought he was doing there. Edith said, "Mrs. Lacey said he was looking for the two patients, the ones who didn't come out of the fire." I walked back up the hill to the hotel in the early dark. The lamps along the path were lit. The wind had picked up and the pines were moving against each other with a soft, continuous sound. From the bottom of the lawn, the crescent rose against the ridge, like a long, pale ship at anchor. Every window on the south wing lit, and one window on the fourth floor of the north wing. Only one, on a floor that the staff had told me was closed for the season, also lit, with a soft, steady yellow light, as if someone in that room were writing by lamp. I did not sleep well after Edith's. I lay in 419 and watched the ceiling, and I thought about Dr. Reeves and about Mrs. Lacey opening a door in 1962, and about the lit window on the closed fourth floor of the north wing. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the phone on the bedside table rang. It was the room phone, the old beige model the Crescent still kept in every guest room, and it rang with the high mechanical bell of a 1980s switchboard. I sat up. I let it ring twice more. Then I picked it up. The line was dead. Not silent dead. The particular non-sound of a line that is not connected to anything. I held the receiver to my ear for several seconds. Then, faintly, from underneath that dead line hollowness, I heard the sound of water, running water, a basin filling. And just at the edge of hearing a voice saying a word that might have been a name and might have been the syllable doctor. I put the receiver down. The phone did not ring again that night. In the morning, I went to the front desk and asked Marlene whether there was any way to pull a record of calls placed to my room from inside the hotel. She looked at the log, frowning. According to the system, no call had been placed to room 419 between checkout time the previous day and breakfast. Not from another room, not from the front desk, not from an outside line. I told her about the water sound. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me one question. Did the voice say a name? I told her I thought it might have. I told her I wasn't sure. She nodded slowly. Then she reached under the counter, into the same drawer she had once put the brass key into, and brought out a thin manila folder. She set it on the counter between us. "You're a writer," she said. "I'm going to do something I don't usually do. I'm going to show you the incident log." The folder was older than I had expected. The pages inside were photocopies, some of them several generations old. The print, fuzzy at the edges. Marlene told me that since 1958, the hotel had kept an internal incident log, not the formal maintenance log which recorded broken locks and leaking pipes, but a separate log started by Mrs. Lacey, where the staff recorded what she had called the other things: guests' accounts, staff accounts, phone calls that came from deadlines, doors that opened, items that moved. She let me read it at the small table in the alcove behind the desk, where the staff took their coffee. The log was extraordinary, not because of any single entry, but because of the patience of the record keeping. Every entry was dated. Every entry named the staff member who had taken the report. Every entry was brief, factual, and free of speculation. Guest in 412 reports knocking on door, no one in hall. November 4th, 1971. Guest in 218, and here I noted the room number, although Edith had told me 218 no longer existed, and I remembered that the brass key had been stamped with that number. Guest in 218 reports water running in bathroom when bathroom is dry. January 9th, 1962. Housekeeper E. Pell reports male figure in chair, room 419, dark suit, writing. December 17th, 1989. I turned the pages slowly. The reports were not constant. They came in clusters, separated by quiet years. The clusters seemed to me, after I had been looking at them for a while, to share a particular shape. I asked Marlene if I could photograph the dates. She said yes. I went back up to my room and sat at the desk by the window and made a list of every clustered date. There were 6 clusters in the log, ranging from 1958 to 2019. I wrote the year of each cluster down the left-hand side of a page. Then, beside each year, I wrote what was happening in Eureka Springs that year, what I could remember, what I would later check. 1962, the year Mrs. Lacey opened the door. 1971, the hotel reopened after a long closure. 1989, a major renovation of the North Wing. 2008, the centennial of the bathhouse fire. 2019, the year a contractor, I would learn, had been hired to do exploratory work on the basement north wall. Every cluster lined up with a year in which someone had disturbed the building. I underlined that on my page and looked at it for a long time. The pattern was not subtle once I saw it. The hotel was quiet mostly in the years when it was left alone. It became loud, phones rang, doors opened. Men in old suits wrote in chairs by the window in the years when someone tried to look at the parts of itself it had walled away. I thought of Marlene's small, tight smile. In my room, the guests, it happens to tend to be writers. I thought of Hollis on the landing. If you go looking for that door, don't go alone. I should at that point have stopped. I knew I should have stopped. I had enough for the article I had been hired to write, and more than enough for the article I had not been hired to write but would probably write anyway. I had Edith's witness account. I had the incident log. I had the brass key and the map and the dry basins under the ground. But I had also by then begun to feel the particular pull that the hotel had been exerting on a certain kind of guest for over 100 years, and I am honest enough to say that the pull was not entirely fear. There is a kind of question that, once you have asked it, asks you back. I had asked the Crescent what was behind its laundry door. The Crescent, in its slow, patient way, had begun to ask me whether I would like to see. That evening, I went down to the kitchen at the end of dinner service when the staff were beginning to break the line down, and I found Hollis sitting at a small steel table near the back, drinking coffee from a paper cup. He looked up at me without surprise. "Tomorrow afternoon?" I said. 2 o'clock? The the laundry?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll meet you at the service door. Bring a coat. It's cold down there." I asked him if he thought it was a bad idea. He thought about it longer than I expected. Then he said, "I think the building doesn't care what we think. It's been waiting longer than any of us. If you're going to ask it with somebody beside you. That's all I know." He finished his coffee. He stood. As he walked past me toward the back of the kitchen, he said, almost to himself, "Wear gloves." I went back up to my room. I sat at the desk and wrote out in clear handwriting a short letter addressed to my editor in Little Rock, summarizing what I had found so far. I sealed it in a hotel envelope. I left it on the desk, waited with the small ceramic lamp where it would be obvious to anyone who came into the room. It was not, I told myself, because I expected not to come back. It was only that the hotel had taught me, by then, to behave as if my notes might one day need to be read by someone else. Hollis met me at the service door at 2 o'clock the next afternoon with a heavy canvas coat over his work shirt, 2 flashlights, a coil of nylon rope, and a small handheld radio clipped to his belt. He handed me the second flashlight. He did not say anything about the rope. We went down the same way as before, through the employees' stairwell, past the landing where the mineral smell began, along the unfinished stone corridor with its broken fluorescent tubes. We did not turn into the room with the dry basins this time. We kept going, past the brick wall I had thought was the end of the corridor on my first visit. Hollis stopped at a narrow steel door I had not seen before, set into the right-hand wall. He took a key from his ring and unlocked it. Behind it was a short flight of 3 concrete steps going down, and then another corridor, lower ceilinged than the first. "Laundry's the next door on the left," he said, and we're going past it. The laundry door, when we passed it, was closed. Behind it, I could hear the heavy, regular thump of an industrial dryer, the kind of sound that, in the basement of a quiet hotel, is oddly comforting proof that the present-day world is still operating somewhere nearby. 20 feet past the laundry, the corridor jogged left and ended at a door. It was not what I had expected. I think I had been imagining something old and iron-bound, the kind of door a building puts up as a warning. This door was plain. It was wooden, painted gray to match the walls, and it had a modern padlock on a steel hasp. The padlock was new. The hasp had been added, I could see, in the last few years. The screw holes around it were clean. "Marlene's order," Hollis said, gesturing at the lock, "after the contractor in 2019. "What happened to the contractor?" Hollis took a key from a separate ring, smaller than the one on his belt. "He came back up," he said, "but he didn't finish the job and he didn't take payment. Quit on the spot, wouldn't tell us why. Drove out of the lot and we never saw him again." He fit the key into the padlock and turned it. The lock opened with a small, dry click. He slipped it off the hasp and laid it carefully on the floor against the wall where we would not kick it. Then he stopped and looked at me and said, "Last chance." I told him I was ready. I was lying, but only partly. He pulled the door open. The hinges were quieter than I had expected. The door swung inward and a wave of air came out, cold, mineral, very faintly sweet, like the lilac smell from my first night, but older, settled, the way a perfume smells in a coat that has not been worn in 20 years. Behind the door was the hallway Mrs. Lacey had seen in 1962. It was tiled. The tile was the same hexagonal pattern as the room with the dry basins, but here the tiles were intact and the floor was wet. Not flooded, just damp, as if condensation had been gathering on it for a century. The walls were stone for the first 6 feet and then plaster above. And the plaster had once been painted a pale green that was now the color of pond water. The corridor went straight north for perhaps 40 feet and ended at another door which was closed. Hollis stepped in first. I followed. Our flashlight beams crossed and uncrossed on the floor. The air was cold enough that our breath was visible. Somewhere behind us, beyond the door we had just opened, I could still hear the muted thump of the laundry dryer. And the sound was so domestic, so ordinary, that it made the hallway around us feel like something in a different building entirely. About halfway down the corridor, on the right-hand wall, a doorway opened into a side room. We stopped. Hollis put his flashlight into the doorway first. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 12, with the same tile floor and the same green plaster walls. In the center of the room was an iron-framed bed. The mattress was gone. The frame was rusted but intact. Beside the bed, a small wooden table held a tin basin and a folded white cloth. On the wall above the bed, someone had pinned a card. The card was yellowed almost to brown. On it, in the same tight, sloping handwriting I had seen in the leather notebook, was written a name and a date. Mrs. H. Whitfield, March 1908. I felt Hollis go still beside me. He had seen the writing too. We did not speak. We moved on. 2 more doorways opened off the corridor, both on the right. Both led to small rooms identical to the first, each with a rusted bed frame, each with a wooden table, each with a card pinned above the bed. Mr. J. Carmichael, February 1908. Miss A. Reeves, March 1908. Miss A. Reeves. I stopped in the doorway of the 3rd room and looked at the card for a long time. Reeves was the name of the doctor whose notebook I had read in the room with the basins, whose figure Edith had described sitting in the chair by the window of room 419, writing. He had not, I realized, been looking for the 2 patients who did not come out of the fire. He had been looking for one of them. We reached the end of the corridor. The door there was older than the one we had come through, wood and dark, with a small iron handle. Hollis put his hand on it and looked back at me. "You sure?" he said. It was not a question. I said yes. He turned the handle. The door opened into a larger room, low-ceilinged, perhaps 30 feet across. The flashlight beam swept across it and showed us in pieces what was inside. A long stone trough running along one wall, half full of black water. A row of brass taps above the trough, identical to the ones in the dry room. A wooden bench. A pile of folded white cloth, gray with dust, on the bench, and in the far corner against the back wall, a chair. The chair was wooden, straight-backed, ordinary. It was sitting upright. It was facing the door. On the chair was a small leather-bound notebook, closed. We stood in the doorway. Neither of us moved. The notebook was the same notebook I had read in the room with the basins 3 days earlier. I recognized the small place on the spine where the pencil should have gone. I recognized the soft, worn corner of the cover. Hollis, beside me, said in a low, even voice, "That book is upstairs." "I know. I locked it up myself yesterday in the office after Marlene showed it to you." I know. We stood there for what was probably 10 seconds and felt longer. Then, in the chair, the notebook opened. It did not flip. It did not fall. The cover lifted slowly, as if a hand we could not see had taken hold of the corner and laid it back against the seat. The pages inside settled, one by one, the way pages settle when a book has been opened to a particular place and the reader has stepped away. They came to rest on a single page near the back. From the doorway, I could not read what was written on it. Hollis's radio on his belt gave a single short burst of static and went silent. He reached up very slowly and turned it off. He said without taking his eyes off the chair, "We're going back." I did not argue. We backed out of the room. We did not turn our backs on the chair until we were in the corridor, and then we walked, not quickly but steadily, the way you walk past a dog you are not sure of. We reached the gray door. We stepped through. Hollis pulled it closed behind us. He put the padlock back through the hasp and snapped it shut and tested it twice. We climbed the stairs in silence. At the top, on the landing where the mineral smell ended, he stopped and put a hand on the wall and stood for a moment with his eyes closed. Then he opened them and said in a voice that was almost steady, "I have worked in this building for 31 years. I have never seen a page turn." I asked him what he thought we had seen. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "Somebody down there is still keeping notes." Marlene was waiting for us in the staff office. I do not know how she had known we were coming up at that moment, or what Hollis had told her, or whether she had simply been sitting in the office for the last 2 hours waiting for one of us to walk through the door. She was at the small desk by the window. The leather notebook, the one we had read in the basement on my second day, was sitting on the desk in front of her, closed, exactly where she said she had locked it up. I looked at it. Hollis looked at it. Marlene watched our faces. "It's been there since yesterday," she said. "I checked the safe at noon. It hasn't moved." I told her as plainly as I could what we had seen at the end of the corridor. She listened without interrupting. When I'd finished, she opened a lower drawer of the desk and took out a second folder, thicker than the incident log. She laid it on the desk beside the notebook. She did not open it right away. "There is a thing I have to tell you," she said, "that is not in any of the brochures, and is not on the ghost tour, and is not in the local newspaper archives, although a piece of it is in the county records if you know where to look." I sat down. Hollis sat down across from her. He had not taken off his canvas coat. Marlene told us this. The fire of April 1908 had not started in the bathhouse. It had started in a small storage room on the north side of the main building, where the staff kept linens and oil for the lamps. The fire had spread quickly along the wooden corridor that connected the main building to the bathhouse. And by the time the staff had organized to evacuate the patients, the corridor had collapsed. The patients in the bathhouse wing there were 11 of them, all in residence under Dr. Reeves's water cure program, had been brought out through a side exit that opened onto the north lawn. All 11 had been accounted for at the time. The doctor's notebook, with its entry about 2 patients unaccounted for, had been written the following day, and the discrepancy had been quietly resolved within the week. The names on the cards in the basement rooms, Whitfield, Carmichael, Reeves, were not the names of patients who had died in the fire. "Then who were they?" I asked. Marlene opened the second folder. Inside was a sheaf of photocopied pages from an old guest registry, the kind of leather-bound book hotels used to keep at the front desk in the early years of the century. The pages were dated between November 1907 and March 1908. Several names were circled in red pencil, including the 3 we had just seen on the cards. They were guests, Marlene said. Long-term guests in Dr. Reeves's program. They checked in. They did not check out. They died? There are no death certificates filed in Carroll County for any of them, she said. And there are no records of them leaving the hotel. They simply stop appearing in the registry after a certain date. Different dates for each one. The last is Miss Reeves in the 3rd week of March, 1908. Miss Reeves? Marlene nodded. The doctor's daughter. She was 18. She had been admitted to the program in January for what the notes called nervous exhaustion. I felt the room press in around me a little. I asked her what she thought had happened to those 3 people. She closed the folder slowly. She said, I think Dr. Reeves's program was not what he told the families it was. I think there were patients he kept past the point of what we would now consider treatment in rooms that were not the rooms the families had been shown. I think when the fire came, the official count was kept clean by the simple expedient of not counting the people in those rooms. And I think when the corridor collapsed and the wing was walled off, those rooms were walled off with it. Hollis said quietly, 3 people. Marlene said, at least 3. I asked her how long she had known. She told me that Mrs. Lacey had told the woman who came after her, who had told the woman who came after her, who had eventually told Marlene when Marlene had taken on the front desk supervisor role in 2003. It was not, she said, a thing the hotel could put in its history. It was not provable in any sense that a court or a journalist would recognize. The bathhouse wing was gone. The bodies, if there were bodies, had been under tons of rubble for over a century, and then under a parking surface, and then under a lawn. There was nothing to dig up that would not destroy the building above it. And the doctor? I asked. What happened to Dr. Reeves? Marlene said, Dr. Reeves left Eureka Springs in May 1908. He returned to St. Louis. He died there in 1919 of influenza. He never came back to the hotel. In life, I said. She looked at me steadily. In life, she agreed. I thought about the man in the chair in 419 in 1989. The notebook on his knee, the pencil in his hand, the way he had walked out without looking at Edith Pell, on his way to an elevator that opened on a floor that was not there. I thought about the open notebook on the chair in the back room of the bathhouse wing. He's still writing, I said. Marlene said, we think he is finishing a record. We think he started it the day after the fire and he has not yet been allowed to stop. We don't know who is keeping him at it. We don't know who he is writing for. But every few years, the things he uses come up: the keys, the cup, the hairpin, the notebook. They come up to the rooms upstairs. They sit on a desk for a night or 2, and then they go back down. I asked her, what would happen if they did not go back down? If someone took one of them out of the building? Her face changed for the first time in the entire conversation. It was a small change, almost not a change at all, but I saw it. It has been tried, she said. Twice that I know of since 1958. Once by a guest in 1974 who took a hairpin in his suitcase. Once by a staff member in 1996 who took one of the keys. And, in both cases, she said, The object returned to the hotel within a week. The hairpin was mailed back in a plain envelope from the address the guest had given at check-in, with no note and no return address. The key was found on the front steps one morning by the bellhop, wrapped in a piece of brown paper. And the people? Marlene was quiet for a long moment. The guest in 1974, she said, drove home to Tulsa and did not unpack his bag for 3 days. When his wife finally opened it to do laundry, she found the hairpin and put it on the dresser. And that night, according to a letter she wrote to Mrs. Lacey, her husband woke up at 3 a.m, walked into the living room, sat in the chair by the window and would not speak. He did not speak for 2 weeks. When he spoke again, the first thing he said was, "I have to send it back." And the staff member in 1996? She mailed the key back herself on the 4th day. She came back to work the next Monday. She did not last out the year. She left town. We do not know where she is now. I sat in the office for a long time after that, with the heat of the radiator under the window and the smell of coffee from the staff pot, and the small, ordinary sounds of the lobby on the other side of the wall, a guest checking in, a phone ringing once and being answered, a child laughing on the front steps as someone arrived, the hotel above us full of life, the hotel below us full of patience. I asked Marlene one last question. "Why do you tell people?" I said, "the writers. Why don't you just keep us out?" She thought about it. Then she said, "Because someone has to know. The staff move on. The owners change. The history gets softer every year. The building remembers, but the building cannot write the article. Every few years, when one of the wandering things finds a writer, we make the decision again. We decide whether this is the one we tell. And you decided to tell me." "I decided," she said, "to tell you part of it. The rest of it, the building told you itself." My last night at the Crescent was a Sunday. The hotel had thinned out after the weekend. The wedding party that had filled the ballroom on Saturday was gone by noon, and the dining room at dinner held only a handful of couples and a single older man reading a paperback at a corner table. I ate quickly. I went up to 419 around 8. I had decided, sitting at Marlene's desk that afternoon, that I would not try to take anything out of the hotel. Not the brass key, not the notebook, not a photograph of any document Marlene had not approved. Whatever I wrote about the Crescent, I would write from memory and from the notes already in my notebook, which I had begun to think of as a small, fragile thing I would have to carry carefully out of the building. I packed most of my suitcase that evening. I laid out clothes for the morning. I set my notebook on the bedside table with the small reading lamp on. I did not turn off the overhead light. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while and listened to the hotel. The elevator on the right ran up and down on its slow schedule. The HVAC sighed in the ceiling. The radiator ticked. From somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. From somewhere below me, the laundry dryers were still running. It was the same hotel I had been sleeping in for 6 nights. The pattern of its sounds had become familiar. I realized, sitting there, that I would miss it. That was the strangest thing of all, that a building which had quietly told me, over the course of a week, that it was the resting place of at least 3 people whose deaths had been hidden, had also managed somehow to feel like a place I would want to come back to. I'm still not sure what to do with that. Around 11, I turned off the overhead light. I left the reading lamp on. I got into bed. I do not know exactly when the sound started. It might have been midnight. It might have been later. I had been drifting in that shallow place between sleep and not, where the mind keeps watch even when the eyes are closed. And I became aware of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They were the same footsteps as my first night. Slow even, walking from the elevator end toward my end. They came up to my threshold. They stopped. I did not move. I waited for the knock. It did not come. What came instead was the smell of lilacs. It moved past me from the foot of the bed toward the head. The way a person walks past you in a narrow space, I felt the air shift. I felt the small change in pressure. That means someone has entered a room and not made a sound. I opened my eyes. The room looked the way it had looked when I went to bed, the wallpaper with its small roses, the 4-poster, the desk by the window, the reading lamp on the bedside table. On the desk, where there had been nothing all evening, sat the brass key. It was lying flat. The number 218 caught the lamplight. The 3 letters beneath it were just visible. I sat up slowly. I did not get out of the bed. I did not reach for the key. I sat against the headboard with the blanket pulled up and I looked at it. I did not feel afraid in the way I had felt afraid on my first night. I felt watched, which is a different thing. I felt that something in the room with me was waiting politely to see what I would do. I did the only thing I could think of. I spoke. "I'm not going to take it," I said. My voice in the room sounded smaller than I had expected. "I'm not going to write anything I wasn't asked to write," I said. "I'll keep the names. I'll tell the story. I won't take anything out of the building." I did not know who I was talking to. I am still not sure. I am not, by training or by inclination, a person who speaks to empty rooms. But the room did not feel empty. For a long time, nothing happened. The lamp burned steadily. The radiator ticked. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator settled in its shaft. Then the brass key on the desk turned over by itself with a small, clear sound, like a tooth tapping a plate. The toothed end was now facing the door. I do not know how to describe what I felt then. It was not exactly relief. It was not exactly fear. It was the particular feeling of having been answered in a language you do not speak, by something that has decided to be patient with you. I lay back down. I did not turn off the lamp. I closed my eyes. After a while, I slept. In the morning, the key was gone. I checked the desk. I checked the floor. I checked the drawer. I checked even inside my own suitcase because I had read enough by then to know that the building's sense of humor was not always kind. The key was nowhere in the room. I packed the last of my things. I went down to the front desk. Marlene was on duty. She had a fresh cup of coffee in her hand, and the same gray cardigan and the same careful eyes. "Checking out," she said. I told her yes. She ran my card. She printed my receipt. She slid it across the counter to me with a pen, the way she had slid the key card across to me on my first night in another life, 6 days earlier. I signed it. She glanced at the signature. She glanced at me. Then she said very quietly, so that the young woman dusting the lobby a few feet away would not hear, "He went back down this morning." Hollis found it on the bench by the trough with the notebook. The notebook was closed. I asked her if that was unusual. She said, "It is the first time in my memory that the notebook has been closed when one of us came down." I did not know what to say to that. She walked me to the front doors. She did not say goodbye. She said, Drive carefully on the switchbacks. The fog comes up fast this time of year. I stepped out onto the porch. The morning was cold and clear. The sun was just coming over the ridge, and the long lawn of the hotel was glittering with frost. My car was the only one in the upper lot. I walked to it slowly. I put my suitcase in the back. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before I started the engine, and I looked up at the white face of the Crescent, at the long row of windows on the south wing, where I had slept, and at the long row of windows on the north wing, where a single window on the fourth floor, on a floor that was closed for the season, held a soft, steady yellow light. I started the car. I drove down the hill into Eureka Springs and out onto the highway south. I have written this account from memory and from the notes in the small black notebook I carried with me through 6 nights at the 1886 Crescent Hotel and Spa. I have changed none of the names that Marlene gave me permission to use. I have left out a small number of details that she asked me to leave out, and a smaller number of details that I have decided on my own are not mine to share. I do not know what is at the end of that corridor behind the laundry. I saw a chair and a notebook and a page that turned by itself. I did not read the page. Hollis did not read the page. As far as I know, no living person has read the page that the notebook was open to that afternoon, except perhaps the man who wrote it. I do not know whether the 3 people whose names I saw on those cards are still in the rooms behind the wall, or whether the rooms behind the wall are something other than rooms, in the way that the floor the left elevator sometimes opens on is something other than a floor. I do not know who keeps Dr. Reeves at his desk. I know that the hotel is still there. I know that the wandering things still come up every few months and sit on a desk on one of the upper floors and then go back down. I know that the staff still keep the incident log, and that Marlene is still on the front desk most mornings, and that Hollis is still in the basement most afternoons, and that somewhere in a wood frame house at the bottom of the hill, Edith Pell is still drinking coffee at her kitchen table and remembering a man in a dark suit who walked past her toward an elevator a long time ago. And I know that if you go to Eureka Springs and you stand on the lawn of the Crescent at a certain hour of the evening and you look up at the north wing, you may see on the 4th floor, on a floor that is closed for the season, a single window with a soft, steady yellow light. You may stand there for a long time and watch it. It does not go out.